At 0212 hours on December 11, 2025, the silence over the vast black expanse of the Caspian Sea was broken not by the wind, but by the high-pitched mechanical drone of a new kind of threat. For nearly 4 years, the Russian High Command had operated under the assumption of strategic depth, the antiquated military doctrine that distance equals safety. They believed that the sheer geography of the Russian Federation, spanning thousands of miles, was a shield that no enemy could penetrate. That assumption didn't just fade away. It was violently evaporated in the span of a few heartbeats. In the darkness, skimming just meters above the choppy waves to avoid radar detection, was a flight of long-range Ukrainian strike drones. These were likely the heavy-lift Lyuti class, a relentless push-propeller machine designed for one-way missions deep into the enemy rear. These machines had traveled over 1,500 kilometers, a journey of endurance that required them to bypass multiple layers of electronic warfare nets, dodge mobile air defense bubbles, and navigate autonomously through hostile airspace. Their destination was a set of coordinates that had never been touched before: the Filanovsky oil rig. This wasn't just a military strike, it was a carefully calculated message delivered with high explosives. As the warhead slammed into the steel superstructure of the Lukoil-owned platform, the impact was immediate. 20 seabed wells were set ablaze, turning the rig into a towering inferno visible for miles. But the shockwave wasn't just physical. It rippled through the Kremlin's entire economic calculus. By striking the Caspian, Ukraine proved that the safe zones for Russian energy extraction no longer exist. Simultaneously, across a staggering 2,000-kilometer arc stretching from the frozen naval bases of the Arctic Circle to the southern steppes of the Volga, the Russian sky filled with incoming bogies. This was not a probing attack. It was a saturation strike of unprecedented scale. 300 drones, cruise missiles, a coordinated swarm designed to overwhelm fire control radars, confuse operators, and dismantle the integrated air defense system. In a single night, the illusion of safety deep inside the Russian Federation was shattered, proving that the front line is no longer a trench in the Donbass. It is everywhere. To truly understand the operational genius of this night, you have to look beyond the fireballs rising over the Caspian Sea. You have to look at the psychological game being played in the skies over Moscow. At the exact moment the oil rigs were burning, air raid sirens were wailing across the Russian capital. Radar screens in the Moscow Defense District, usually monitoring for high-altitude threats, lit up with dozens of low-flying contacts. Between 60 and 100 drones were vectoring directly toward the city center from multiple azimuths. But this was a sleight of hand. A massive, lethal magic trick known in military terms as maskirovka turned against its inventors. Ukrainian planners understood a fundamental truth about Russian command psychology. The Kremlin cannot ignore a threat to Moscow. It is the political heart of the regime, the seat of power, and the home of the elite. When those drones appeared on the scopes, Russian commanders had no choice but to react with maximum force. They activated a general air raid warning, sending millions of residents into a panic. They scrambled fighter interceptors, burning precious aviation fuel. They shut down 4 major airports: Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Zhukovsky. This shutdown was a tactical victory in itself. For 10 hours, the primary logistics hub of Western Russia was paralyzed. Thousands of passengers were stranded, cargo flights were grounded, and the city's connection to the outside world was severed. Meanwhile, air defense batteries, Panzer S-1s and S-400s, fired wildly into the night sky, expending multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles to shoot down cheap, mass-produced drones that were effectively flying decoys. And that was exactly the point. This was a resource exchange war, and Russia was losing. While the Russian military frantically focused its eyes and its fire control radars on the capital, the real wolf pack, the remaining 240 drones, slipped through the gaps in the perimeter. They weren't heading for the symbolic targets in Moscow. They were hunting the lifeblood of the war, the fuel refineries. This is a classic saturation tactic evolved for the 21st century drone age. By forcing the enemy to commit their most advanced short-range air defense systems to protect political symbols like the Kremlin, Ukraine effectively stripped protection away from the industrial targets that actually matter. The drones heading for Moscow didn't need to hit a single building to be successful. Their payload was panic and distraction. Meanwhile, the hunter-killer groups heading for the refineries in Samara, Afipsky, and Saratov flew virtually unimpeded. In the Samara region, the failure of the Russian air defense grid was absolute. Locals reported seeing flights of 15 to 20 propeller-driven drones cruising at treetop level, nap of the earth flying designed to hide in the ground clutter of radar systems. They passed overhead completely unchallenged by anti-aircraft fire. The skies were wide open, the defenders were looking the wrong way, and the hunters had free rein to pick their targets and dive. By 400 hours, as the sun began to crest over the Volga, the full scale of the devastation became impossible to hide. The primary objective of this operation was not merely to harass, it was the systematic, kinetic dismantling of Russia's hydrocarbon backbone. To understand the magnitude of this strike, we must analyze the target selection. This was a synchronized takedown of the financial engine that funds the invasion. In the Samara region, located a staggering 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, the Syzran oil refinery became the first confirmed casualty of the night. Local residents reported seeing between 15 and 20 propeller-driven drones, likely the heavy-class Liu-T platforms, navigating the airspace with total impunity. These slow-moving assets, which should have been easy targets for modern air defense systems like the Panzer S-1, were instead allowed to loiter, line up their attack runs, and dive. The result was catastrophic. One drone was filmed skimming the treetops, staying below the radar horizon, before slamming into the facility's primary distillation column. This is a critical choke point. Without the distillation tower, a refinery is nothing more than a storage yard. It cannot process crude into diesel, jet fuel, or gasoline. This facility in Samara was absorbing its third successful strike since August, proving that Russian air defense cannot adapt fast enough to protect static industrial targets. But the destruction didn't stop there. Simultaneous impacts were recorded in the Afipsky region, 400 kilometers from the launch sites, and in Saratov, 600 kilometers deep. The Afipsky refinery, a facility with an annual production capacity of over 9 million tons, was hit for the sixth time since July. Intelligence assessments indicate that this relentless pounding has reduced the plant's operational output by up to 30%. This is the strategy of compounding attrition. Ukraine is not giving Russia the breathing room to repair the damage. They strike, wait for the repair crews to deploy, and then strike again, turning the industrial site into a kill zone and bleeding the facility of both resources and technical expertise. Yet the most audacious element of this campaign took place far to the east, in a theater of war that had remained untouched for nearly 4 years, the Caspian Sea. At 5:15 a.m., reports surfaced of a massive fire on the Filanovsky oil rig. This target is significant. Owned by Lukoil, this offshore platform is situated 1,500 kilometers from the nearest probable Ukrainian launch site. For a drone to travel that distance, maintain communication or autonomous navigation, and strike a specific rig in the middle of the sea is a feat of engineering that rivals the capabilities of major superpowers. The Filanovsky rig is a crown jewel in Russia's energy portfolio. It pumps crude oil from 20 seabed wells, producing approximately 120,000 barrels per day. In financial terms, that rig generates roughly $6 million in revenue every single day. When 4 Ukrainian drones slammed into the superstructure, they didn't just bend metal, they incinerated cash. Let's look at the asymmetry of the cost. The drones used in this attack, likely the Liu-T or a similar long-range variant, have an estimated unit cost of around $200,000. The total cost for the strike package that hit the rig was likely under $1 million. In return, they inflicted damage that halted $6 million of daily revenue, not including the tens of millions required for repairs, the cost of extinguishing a fire at sea, and the long-term degradation of the wells. This is the brutal mathematics of modern war. For an investment of $800,000, Ukraine erased days, perhaps weeks, of Russian oil profits. As the Kyiv Post reported, by midday on December 11th, Russian firefighting vessels were still battling the blaze, struggling to contain a disaster that was eating into the Kremlin's war chest hour by hour. The gloves were officially off. The Caspian Sea, once a safe rearguard logistical lake for Russia, has been turned into a contested war zone. However, to view this solely as an economic attack is to miss the wider strategic intent. While the oil industry was burning, Ukraine simultaneously executed a suppression of enemy aviation campaign that stretched from the heart of Russia to the Arctic Circle. This was a dual-pronged assault. While one wing of the drone swarm hunted refineries, another wing hunted the Archers, the aircraft that launched the deadly glide bombs devastating Ukrainian front lines. The drone command targeted airfields in Ryazan, Voronezh, and Ivano. But the shock to the Russian system came from the strike on the Murmansk region. Murmansk is in the Arctic. It is the home of Russia's strategic nuclear bombers. It is supposed to be a sanctuary, protected by layers of the finest electronic warfare and surface-to-air missiles the Federation possesses. Yet, a Ukrainian drone traversed the entire length of western Russia to smash into a runway at the Olenia airfield. The message sent to the Russian General Staff was chilling. We can touch you anywhere. At the Ivano airfield, the damage was more immediate and tactical. Drones struck a trio of hangars, likely damaging or destroying Su-34 fullback fighter bombers. The Su-34 is the workhorse of the Russian air campaign, the primary delivery system for the KAB glide bombs that have been pounding Ukrainian positions. Each jet costs upwards of $30 to $40 million. More importantly, the pilots and the airframes are finite resources. By hitting the fuel depots in Ryazan and the hangars in Ivano, Ukraine is effectively grounding the Russian Air Force, starving the jets of fuel, and destroying the runways they need to take off. This comprehensive strike package comes at a critical geopolitical juncture. Throughout late 2025, a narrative had begun to take hold in Washington and Western Europe, a narrative of inevitability. Following comments from U.S. President Donald Trump suggesting that Ukraine had no cards left to play and was losing the war, pressure began mounting on Kyiv to accept a ceasefire that would cede territory to Moscow. The timing of the December 11th strike was a direct kinetic rebuttal to that political narrative. It was a demonstration of capability designed to show the incoming U.S. administration that Ukraine is not a spent force. Contrary to the stalemate theory, Ukraine proved it can expand the battle space to a continental scale. By hitting targets across a 2,000-kilometer front in a single night, Kyiv demonstrated that it still holds the initiative and the technological edge to threaten the very stability of the Russian state. The Russian reaction to this disaster was a predictable mixture of silence and denial. The Ministry of Defense released a terse morning briefing, claiming to have intercepted 287 drones and stating that damage on the ground was minimal. This is the standard "everything is going to plan" propaganda line. But the reality on the ground, the thousands of passengers stranded at Moscow's airports, the smoke plumes visible from space over the Caspian, and the frantic telegram messages from local governors tells the true story. The minimal damage lie is becoming harder to sell to the Russian public. When air raid sirens are forcing Muscovites into shelters and gas prices are rising because refineries are offline, the war is no longer a distant special military operation. It is a daily reality. The psychological impact of these strikes is just as potent as the physical damage. It erodes the social contract between Putin and his people, the promise that the Tsar provides security. On December 11th, that security was proven to be a myth. Furthermore, this operation signifies a shift in Ukraine's long-term strategy. In 2024, strikes were often sporadic hit-and-run affairs. A refinery would be hit, then left alone. Now, under the philosophy adopted in late 2025, the approach is systemic destruction. It is a war of strangulation. By cutting refining capacity from 5.5 million barrels a day down to 5 million, Ukraine is slowly asphyxiating the Russian economy. They are burning the candle at both ends, destroying the product Russia sells to make money and destroying the fuel Russia needs to fight the war. As the smoke clears over the Volga and the Caspian, one thing is undeniably clear. The rules of engagement have changed. The December 11th operation was not an anomaly. It was a prototype for the future of this conflict. Ukraine has successfully integrated long-range suicide drones, decoy tactics, and satellite intelligence into a unified strike complex capable of overwhelming a superpower's air defenses. The Russian military machine, for all its size and bluster, has been revealed to be brittle, overstretched, and blind to the threats approaching its own capital. The implications for the coming winter are profound. If Ukraine can strike an oil rig in the Caspian Sea and an airfield in the Arctic Circle on the same night, no square inch of Russian territory is safe. The safe zones where Russia stores its ammunition, fuels its jets, and pumps its oil have been erased. We are witnessing the evolution of 21st century warfare, where a smaller, more agile force can bleed a giant dry through precision, technology, and sheer audacity. The bear is wounded and the hunter is closing in. But the air campaign is only half the story. While the skies over Russia burn, a silent, deadly game of cat and mouse is playing out in the waters of the Black Sea, where Putin's navy is being hunted to extinction. How did Ukraine force the Russian fleet into hiding without a conventional navy of its own? We're going to break down the naval drone technology that changed naval warfare forever in our next briefing. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and understand the tactics shaping the modern battlefield, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Hitting that bell icon is the only way to ensure you don't miss the next intelligence drop. This is the new reality of war. Adapt or perish. Dismissed.